Hey folks, Dr. Mike here for Renaissance Periodization. What can you learn from the best lifters about how they train, about how they diet, using their words that they talk about and their examples of what they're actually doing? And what should you probably not take away from the best lifters so that you can have the best results for yourself? What are we going to be talking about today in more specifics? First, we're going to define really quick what we mean about the best lifters. Secondly, we'll talk about how to examine what's actually going on with what they're doing. Sometimes it's a little bit hazier than it seems. We're going to talk about what you should probably reserve judgment on. There's some things that lifters at the top say or do that you probably should be like, Then we're going to talk about what you can learn and can take away. And then lastly, just a bit of a reminder to be a thinker and not a parrot. So let's get into it. Easiest slide today. Defining the best, they're just jacked dudes, right? People who are more jacked than average considerably. Pro bodybuilders for sure. Top ranked, maybe top 200 ranked powerlifters. Okay, very worth paying attention to. Olympics bound weightlifters, for example. People that are fucking good, right? And this also includes the most jacked people at your gym, right? They're absolutely worth looking at. Fundamentally, this isn't something I was actually planning on addressing, but I'll say it. The question of like, well, why do we care what they do? The proof is in the pudding, okay? If you are trying to design a rocket and there's a country that's designed all the best and fastest rockets, maybe they made some mistakes. Maybe they just have an overfunded program. Maybe they're doing really dumb shit, but just succeeding anyway. But at the end of the day, because they got the rockets that are the fastest, if you find out something about their rocket program, it's good to pay attention, right? And all of the speculation in the world from small, not remotely jacked lifters, no matter how intelligent they are or how organized their structure is, no matter how much they talk down and how stupid the bros are, they're still pencil-necked. Can I swear yet? Probably not.
Go for it.
Pencil-necked assholes that are just not jacked. And maybe they're relatively jacked before they started, maybe not. But when you look at all of the most jacked people in the world, for the love of God, they're onto something. There's at least something we can learn, right? For sure. Now, there's a lot of sort of uneven ground here. And it's not clear that all of the potential lessons are the good lessons we want. So when we look at what the best are doing and saying, we can use some rough guidelines to keep in mind just to make sure we're not learning the wrong kind of stuff. So here they are. First up, we want to look for mass patterns, okay? If most or tons and tons of lifters are doing something, that's great. Probably bears paying more attention to. Versus like if one or a few people are doing something quirky, they go, what about this bodybuilder? What do you think about they're doing? Not much, motherfucker, because they're one of 1,000 people and the only person that does that. Now, can you get an idea about trying it yourself? Sure. But if you like say have a way of leg pressing that you're like, this is the way, trust me. And someone's like, why? Like, because what's his name does it? And they're like, yeah, but nobody else does that. Like, well, yeah, but he's jacked. Like, yeah, but so are tons of other people, right? It doesn't make any sense. It's totally cool to get inspired by those ideas, but it's better to stick to mass patterns. If you really want to learn from the best, look at what most or many of them do. Real good idea. And then you start to think, all of them probably, not for sure, aren't wrong. So maybe there's something to see here. Next, huge one, the test of time. Okay, there's tons of shit that all of the top guys start doing at the same time that's new, that ends up not working, and they all discard. Like one of them is like that Myo bullshit, like the electric shit you plug into your quads and the machine fucking fires your quads for you. You do leg extensions. Yeah, they might have some kind of tiny marginal benefit, but sure as hell not worth the price of the machine. And a lot of top guys are using it because they're always looking for the next cool thing. But like 2 years ago, they weren't using it. And in 2 years, I can fucking promise you they won't be using it. You don't want to be like a fad rider. So if something's been practiced for years and it's not a new thing, it's probably worth paying attention to. So powerlifters have been training heavy and hard for decades. Bodybuilders have been eating higher protein diets for decades. There's probably something to that. But if tons of the new bodybuilders are taking this new supplement, like citrulline malate, well, everyone takes it. Like, yeah, well, maybe in 2 years they won't, and you'll feel like a chump when you tried it, right? So you can try new things for sure. But if you're trying to learn from the best, your better option is to learn what they've been doing time tested over a long period of time. Next up, you got to be able to separate common insights that the top people can have versus common flaws. And there's really interesting ways to separate these. Here's one example. You look at how a lot of bodybuilders train, and it's kind of like sort of plenty of cheating and lots of partial range of motion. Not all the time, but some of the time. And you're like, man, that must be because it's good. But then you look at how almost all of the top female bodybuilders train. Like relative to their genetics, the fact that they're female, they're just as jacked, relatively speaking, as the males. I mean, they've milked the shit out. And a lot of times they're even leaner, which makes no goddamn sense. So these are people you really want to fucking pay attention to. And you see a real female bodybuilding pro at the gym, you're like, what the fuck? That is unbelievable, right? Almost every female trains with strict technique and no cheating at all. And you think, oh, fuck. So if cheating and bullshit momentum is this crazy strategy that the pros use to get as big as possible, how come none of the females do it? They do almost everything else. Well, the answer is they're not egotistical assholes like men. The number one reason why pro bodybuilders cheat and do momentum stuff is because they're fucking ego-driven assholes like the rest of us men, and they just fucking want to fucking, how many reps more? And it's thoughtless, but they're all very highly testosterone-driven men. So like half of them tend to do that, and half of them keep it in check and do good technique. But if you look at the half that do it, you'll be like, oh, there's something to that. Half of them don't do it. So that's hint number one, that it's maybe a flaw, not an insight. And the huge hint is like females hardly do it at all. And you're like, man, like there's no way they're just not using this incredible strategy. Like, truth be told, the female pros, they use all the same drugs, they use all the same dieting protocols, they use all the same kind of training splits, but they don't happen to cheat almost ever. And their technique's almost always better. And it's like, okay, maybe it is the male ego. So definitely give it some thought to make sure you're not parroting, again, we'll have that slide later, a common flaw, but actually doing a common insight, okay? And that takes a little bit of thought. It's not immediately apparent every time what's going on. Next, training age. You got to keep this in mind. Almost all the best guys are the advanced guys. They've been training for a long time. So their protocols for training, for diet, for everything are designed for their late training age. And that means you can't just apply them to yourself if it's your first year of training. This just does not work like you start a year of training and you look at what Ronnie Coleman is doing or Phil Heath or whatever, and you're like, I'm going to do that because they're that big and that's what they're doing. Well, maybe they didn't get that big doing that. They're doing that now because they are that big and maybe riddled with injuries, maybe concerned about their waist size and a bunch of other stuff you have no business concerning yourself with. You do not copy the advanced because you know they're doing something a little bit different, right? Like if you try to take, a course about how to like draw your pistol and shoot it at opponents and put it back in, you don't start with Navy SEAL training of like drawing multiple weapons and discarding them and knives and all this crazy shit. You're not at that level. You don't need that shit. It's wholly inappropriate for you. You need the basics because you're going to try to do Navy SEAL shit and shoot yourself in the foot as soon as you take your gun out, right? You need something different. Yeah, the Navy SEALs are the best, right? But they don't train like that now. They don't say everyone else should train like that. That's only for the best. There's a different training age for everyone else. Same with lifting, powerlifting, bodybuilding, strongman, so on and so forth. Cool example from strongman real quick. Most of the best strongmen in the world do lots of event training nowadays, right? But when they started out, most of them started out either through just general muscle building or powerlifting and did mostly compound barbell heavy basics and just ate a shitload of food and then eventually got into the events. If you're a first year strongman, you're not big enough to be that yet, okay? And you're doing like tons of technical work on the implements a ton and easing up on the compound heavy lifting, you're not going to go very far in the sport because you're never going to build the raw size and basic strength that you need for the top. So again, you don't just copy the routines at the top because you know they're for a very specific group of people. Next, genetics. People at the top of the lifting community have slightly different genetics than the rest of us, okay? In what ways? Many ways, but one of the ones that stands out just as an example is a lot of them are more fast twitch dominant. Okay, they usually come from American football backgrounds, sprinting backgrounds, heavy athletic backgrounds. They're very fast twitch dominant, which means a couple of things they're going to gravitate to in their own programs, which might not be ideal necessarily for you. One is lower frequencies. Faster twitch muscle fibers take more damage. They take more time to recover. They'll benefit from lower frequencies of training a muscle group than you might. Another one is repetition ranges. They may benefit from training a little heavier than you might on average, relatively speaking, maybe more in the 5 to 10 rep range, less in the 20 to 30 than you might, right? Volumes. Faster twitch individuals need physically less number of sets to get the same stimulus and more to grow. So some guy might say like, man, 4 sets of leg press is all I need twice a week to get my quads as big as possible. You try and you think, I'm not even fucking sore. I didn't even feel like I did anything. How is this possible? And someone's like, shut up, pussy, you're too fucking small to criticize. Do these 4 fucking sets. You're like, does that make a lot of sense? No. Like you might be smaller and slower twitch, so you might be able to do 8 sets or 12 sets per session, benefit much more. And then when you get that big and strong, you may be doing 6 sets, or you never do 4 because you were never that fast twitch to begin with. So example, the genetics are different, so some of the application will be different as well. I don't have to say it, but I will. Drugs. Folks at the top a lot of times take drugs, right? Even if they say they don't sometimes. And that can change some nutritional approaches. And the other good thing about drugs is usually it functions almost exactly like genetics. It doesn't change things in a really weird manner. It just lets you get away with more and lets you put in more and not die, right? So it's just, you can do less and do more. It just makes you better. So a lot of times it doesn't change a whole lot, but some nutritional approaches, especially really particular ones, are different. You see a lot of pro bodybuilders' diets. You're like, what the fuck do they eat 7 times a day? Why is it real specific foods? Why is there almost no fat? Well, when you're jamming, 50 IUs of insulin and, 12 IUs of growth into yourself every day, that changes carbohydrate dynamics, significantly changes carbohydrate dynamics. And you have to get very specific or you go hypoglycemic and really terrible shit happens, right? It's a thing that straight up does not apply to you unless you're cramming yourself with farm. So you got to be a little easy on those real specifics, especially with nutrition, because you got to think drugs are probably part of the equation. Lastly, what you want to take away are directions, general directions of intellectual effort, not exact direct practices. So for example, when you see a bodybuilder and he weighs 250 pounds and he's eating 400 grams of protein a day, don't think, I got to eat 400 grams of protein. Maybe think, I could experiment with a slightly higher protein intake than I do now and see how it affects me, right? You go in that direction of higher protein, not exactly to the finish line of 400 grams of protein. Another one is, someone says, an advanced lifter says, I train 3 times a week, try training 3 times a week. Maybe you don't try to train 3 times a week, but you're currently training once a week a muscle group, maybe go to twice a week. See how that feels. If they say train 4 times a week and you're currently at 2, maybe go to 3, right? You will understand all of the same principles, just getting closer to where they are without jumping to where they are right away. And where they are right away may be wholly inappropriate for you or appropriate only years down the line. Now, that is how to examine what you're seeing. After the examination, what should you probably reserve judgment on and sort of not really invest a lot of time in, or just very sparse investment just to try something? Okay, this is the stuff not to take away from what the best are doing. First, exact programs. Okay, a lot of even top lifters will tell you that's just a stupid idea. And that includes the exact volumes, frequencies, pulsatilities. There's a thing though. People want to know the exact programs. I post on my Instagram all the time and the exact thing I'm doing, and people seem to be fascinated by it. It's cool. I get the fan thing. I'm a fan of a ton of lifters. I love seeing lifters' individual programs, just be like, ooh, that's cool. I like watching Lord of the Rings. I'm not trying to be a fucking hobbit, right? I'm not going to do that exact program, but it's cool to see, right? So leave it at cool to see and don't just copy it verbatim. Be like, well, Flex Lewis does 18 sets for side delts, so I'm going to do 18. Like, the shit does not work. You will not turn into Flex Lewis doing 18 sets of side delts, and who knows what else negative could happen through that misapplication. Next, exact exercise techniques. Not a good idea to religiously copy. You can experiment with a few that you find interesting, but don't just go doing them. There's too much diversity among the top people here. Be like, this is how guys row at the top. You look at 5 different rowing videos and 5 different bodybuilders do it completely differently. You're like, okay, I guess I was wrong, right? And there's a ton of poisoning here by the male ego. A lot of exercise techniques in bodybuilding suck because the male ego is just a thing and it makes you throw technique to the wind. You can tell because a lot of the top powerlifters have way better technique because they can't let their ego slip in because they're held to very, very objective standards. So a lot of times be like, oh man, like look at the way this guy does skull crushers, or not. Just try to take maybe the gist away, or maybe try it like that, but don't be like, this is how to do skull crushers, right? And that goes, so more generally for direct transfer of anything. Remember, genetics, drugs, training age, etc., they really muddy the picture. So if you take an exact protocol for anything, don't do that. Try to get the ideas out of it. The principles, not exactly the thing that it is, right? Another one. This is not always the case, but just a grain of salt. People say stuff, and they might do some different stuff. At the end of the day, some folks are not big thinkers. Okay, you may have a bodybuilder or a powerlifter in mind that you're like, oh man, I love this guy's physique. I want to ask him questions about how he got it. And you may get your wish and meet your heroes. I'm going to tell you guys right now, and those of you who have had this experience before, please feel free to comment in the comments below. You may be highly fucking disappointed. You may be like, so how many sets a week of quads do you do? And they're like, oh, I don't really count sets. And you're like, huh. What is your favorite source of carbs? And they're like, oh yeah, white rice. And you're like, I notice you eat a lot of oatmeal. And they're like, not really. But the last diet they published online is like almost all oatmeal. And you're like, what what the fuck? Remember, you know them because they do this really well or this really well, not because they do that really well. Their coach might do that really well. Maybe you should go talk to their coach. And maybe the lifter is super insightful, but maybe not. So careful here. Very, very much careful. Sometimes what they say might not make a whole lot of sense, but then what they actually do might make more sense. And sometimes neither. Okay, so be careful. You're not necessarily dealing with intellectual experts. You're dealing with individual people, some of whom are not that sharp. I'm just going to fucking throw it out there. This is not news to anyone. Some of them are really sharp. Make sure you find out who's who and listen to the sharp people more. Okay? Next, a single case or individual anything is not good to build anything upon. Like, can you get some inspiration from that and try it? Sure. But don't make rules out of it. For example, somebody curls in an interesting way. They flare their elbows out. You ask, should I curl like that? Maybe ask yourself. Maybe ask them and they never reply. First of all, maybe they're hurt. Like a bunch of the ways I train on video are like, because I'm hurt. Like, you don't want to train like a hurt person. You can do a better job, right? Maybe they're too big to do it the right way. When I do skull crushers, and you guys might have seen this on video, like in the Smith machine, I do them essentially JM style, and I have to keep my elbows out. Why? Because my pecs are physically so fucking big, I can't pull my fucking arms in. I would love to. It's physically impossible. And I'm not even that jacked. This guy's so... Look up Nicholas Villiard on Instagram, and look at his physique, and how the fuck does he train at all? Because he's just like a balloon filled with muscle. It's insane. You don't want to copy his exercise techniques. You can do a better job than him. And if he could somehow magically keep all his muscle size and have your flexibility, he would take it in a fucking heartbeat. So careful about like, oh, well, this guy does this thing like this. There could be so many reasons for it that are not optimization, right? They're even worse than optimization. They're constraint from injury and flexibility, so on and so forth. Lastly, don't cherry pick, okay? You can get real dogmatic real quick about a practice that I can find half of the bodybuilders or powerlifters that don't do it. People say, oh man, like West Side, that's the way to get strong. Be like, okay, most of the top guys don't even use West Side in raw lifting. You're like, fuck. So if you defend West Side enough, you're going to be backed into a corner. Let's say you're like, dude, failure. You got to train to failure every set. That's how the top guys do it. You look at the top guys, that's not how they do it. A bunch of them don't train to failure at all, right? There was a big thing where like Jay Cutler was on, I think, Fawad Abiad's channel, and Fawad's like, you know, do you train to failure? Did you? And he's like, never, maybe once. And it was like, what? He won 4 Olympias. He trained for like 20 years, never went to failure. He's like, I don't, for me, it never really did a whole lot. You don't want to be like, everyone, you don't train to failure. You're going to be a failure. And then like Jay Cutler's like, hello. And you're like, shit. Okay, I guess that doesn't work. So try not to cherry pick. Try to take more generalized things that most people are doing. If you like something someone's doing, you can be inspired to try it, but don't go telling yourself and everyone else that this is for sure the answer. All right. Now, that's a lot of stuff you should reserve judgment on and thus can't learn from. What can you learn? The plus side. First, probably what not to do. Okay, if there's a near consensus from interviews from top people about what mistakes did you make when you were a young kid, don't do that shit. They'll say a lot of the same stuff. I trained with too much volume. I tried to progress too rapidly. I wasn't consistent with my nutrition. I wasn't worried about my sleep. If they all say that was a bad idea, probably don't do those things and do the opposite of those things. Great takeaway. Another one is near universal fundamentals. So if pretty much all the guys at the top lower their calories on a fat loss phase, eat a higher protein diet, eat a relatively low-fat diet when they diet and try to eat as many carbs as possible, eat more than 2 or 3 meals per day when they diet, and they're all super jacked, you know, maybe some of those things aren't necessarily true, but I would put my marbles in them unless I have tons of research and tons of counterexamples to go the other way. Some in this list include higher protein dieting, heavy training. You're not going to get huge doing sets of 50. Dedicated rest. Okay, almost all the guys at the top take times to rest, time away. None of them grind through entire years and years and years with no rest. Having a plan. Almost everyone has a plan. Focusing on progression. Almost everyone's focused, at least somewhat on progression, not just willy-nilly come in and sort of have workouts. The essence of compound movements and how to do them. Not the specifics, but like, okay, more or less the movement pattern. The essence of a mind-muscle connection and that it's important. Almost everyone preaches by it. Almost everyone does it. Probably a good idea to at least try this kind of stuff. And lastly, for the stuff that maybe there's not a consensus on, you can take as interesting suggestions, right? Even when one or a handful of the best suggests a given practice, maybe it's worthwhile to you to try it. So, for example, a food choice. Someone says, hey, I really like steak for these following meals. Try it. No big deal. No love lost. A cooking style. Someone's like, hey, listen, air fryer will change your life when you're dieting. Yeah, that doesn't mean you go yelling at the hilltops that everyone who doesn't use one is stupid, but maybe you can go over a friend's house who has an air fryer, try it, and you're like, oh my God, this is incredible, right? Exercise selection, technique. You can absolutely try stuff, just don't get dogmatic about it, right? Before you try it, it should pass at least some logical test of being reasonable. If someone tells you to do something that doesn't make any goddamn sense at all, you can try it, but then after it fails, you'll be like, what the hell was I doing, okay? You only have a limited bandwidth to try stuff. Try the stuff that makes some sense, all right, most of the time. And it's not dogma, just something you try for yourself. Again, you're not telling other people, like, if you don't train to failure, you're an idiot. Just go home and train to failure a bunch and see how it works, right? And if it doesn't work well, don't be afraid to drop it out. All right. So, how do we make sure, to conclude all this, that we're thinking for ourselves, not just parroting what we think the best all seem to think or most seem to think? Couple of points here. First, all of the how to examine points from earlier, take those into considerations. Make sure you're examining mass patterns, things lots of people do, maybe most or almost all do. Think of the test of time. What people have almost all been doing for 20 or 30 years in lifting, probably some underlying grains of truth to it, and it's not total bullshit. Maybe, but probably not. Think about common flaws and don't get messed up with those, like the male ego, genetics, drugs, training age discounts. Think before you accept anything to make sure you're getting the closer to the truth that you can be. Number 2, everything you learn is at best a suggestion, not a rule set you never violate. Not this is how it works, period. Okay, so people will do that. They'll have Facebook debates where like, none of the fucking top guys do this. This is how the top guys do it. If you do it any other way, you're a fucking idiot. Like, imagine saying that about bodybuilders from the 50s. Like, they were doing some odd shit and you'd be like, that's how you get big. Like, the average weight-trained college student who's dedicated is about as big as the top 50s bodybuilders were. Good God. Like, imagine telling someone like Phil Heath, like, hey man, the guys in the 50s didn't do what you were doing, dumbass. And he'd be like, I'm sorry, what? Like, my arm is the size of all of them put together. Okay. So you don't want history to leave you behind. Everything is a suggestion. Everything is an open book. It's okay not to be dogmatic, and it's okay to not write things off completely or think you have to do it this way. Another one. Independence of thought is a really, really great idea, but it comes with some responsibility. So if you do something that none of the top lifters do, or very few, you might be a thought leader. You might be ahead of the game, and maybe later other people will start doing what you were already doing for a long time. But you should be humble about your ideas because you can be wrong. And unless you like being stupid in public and embarrassing yourself, if you're going against the grain, say, I believe this is the right way to do things. I have my reasons. But I'm not going to go ahead and tell everyone that this is 100% obviously the truth because, not a lot of really jacked, strong people agree with me, right? However, if you're doing something that nearly all of the top lifters say is not a good idea, like you're very, very strong and you're trying to do super high frequency training, almost all the top lifters will tell you that's not sustainable. You can do it, right? But give it some deep thought before you do and make some mistakes you can't take back, right? You get a torn pec and someone's like, how'd you do that? You're like, I was trying to bench heavy 5 days a week. You're like, okay. Weren't you like a 400-pound bencher? You're like, yep. Didn't people tell you that was a bad idea? Like, yep, everyone told me it was a bad idea. Like, and what did you think about that? Like, they're all fucking stupid. Like, are they stupid now? Like, no, I'm stupid now. You got me, right? So if you're really going against the grain, not just in a way people have never thought of or in a way people are neutral to, but in a way most people are like, dude, don't do that. Give it some thought. You may be much smarter than everyone else. That's possible. But are you much wiser than everyone else combined? Unlikely. Possible again, but unlikely. So you want to be on the side of likelihood, not the side of being a rare case, right? Lastly, and this goes for almost everything, try to be open-minded, which means what? Be willing to change your views. It's okay. We don't have to have an attachment to our views. You can be pro this one thing, today, and then years later you can change your mind and be against it or pro something else. Totally cool. Be willing to try alternate approaches. Don't just write things off. You're like, oh, that's interesting. I'm at least going to try it. Be willing to buck the trend. Sometimes a lot of people, there's mass delusions are a thing and they're all doing some shit wrong. And then if you buck the trend and do the right thing, years later, everyone else can catch up to you and be like, holy shit, you were right this whole time, right? That's It's nice, it pats your ego, but the better thing is that you just didn't waste time doing dumb shit. So if you look around and everyone's jumping off bridges, don't jump off the bridge. Go about your life. Maybe in the end, that'll be a much better thing. However, just as much as you're willing to, be willing to buck the trend and sort of do the right thing by yourself, even if no one agrees, you should also be reverent of the accomplishments of the best, okay? You don't look at someone who weighs 280 pounds and has veins and be like, the guy fucking knows nothing. Nothing? Nothing? So how the fuck is it that he knows nothing and he's everything you want to be and you know everything and you're nothing you want to be? Is there like a time lag? Is it just he's taking every single possible drug? Is it your genetics are at 0 and his are at 110%? How does that work? If you layer in a bunch of the excuses, at some point it's just a shit festival of excuses. So when I'm looking at guys in a gym and tons of them are jacked and tons of them are lean or tons of them are super strong and they're all doing a lot of the same stuff, I may not agree with them 100%, but I have some reverence for it. Like, I'll take pause and be like, they might be onto something. Maybe the answer to the might is they're not onto something, but I'm going to leave that in there. You never want to write off people that are incredibly well accomplished, right? Like, you look at an Olympic champion wrestler and he beat everyone, and you're like, his technique's not going to work. Like, okay. But it has worked. Now, it might not be the ideal technique. There may be great modifications that he doesn't. But I wouldn't just go running and saying this is worthless, right? So have some respect, have some respect. People why do I say this? Incels on fucking Reddit and shit do this shit all the time. Like, fucking pros are idiots. None of that shit works. What you need to do is, who the fuck are you? You need to do like natties. The way natties need to train is, motherfucker, you ain't even a natty. You are nobody. You don't even have a profile picture. Why the hell would I listen to you? How many natties you coached? How much do you bench? Nothing. Nobody. Go away, right? Zero reverence is stupid because it leaves you ignoring all the people who have succeeded. Now, again, they might not all be doing the right shit. There may be some illusions there, but for the love of God, they're onto some good stuff, right? Lastly, don't nut ride. Okay, you're better than that. When you pick a lifter that you want to like just give them infinity blowjobs or something, you're like, oh my God, what's his name does it, so I'm going to do it. Like if you met them and you came up to a booth and you're like, I do everything you do, I copy you verbatim, they're going to be like, okay, so excellent. And what did you say your name was? Awesome. Enjoy the expo. I'll see you later. And then they check to make sure that parts of them are not missing. You didn't like take shit away and take a lock of their hair or some shit like that, right? Everyone's human. Everyone makes mistakes. It's awesome to have respect for folks. But when someone you respect can do no wrong and you not ride the fuck out of them, it insults you and it insults them and it does no good for anyone. So when you guys say out there, oh, Dr. Mike says, Dr. Mike is a fucking chump who could be wrong about all this shit. Now, maybe he's not. Maybe some of the shit he's saying is interesting and maybe he talks about himself in the third person. Weird. But in any case, not riding won't get you very far. Learning from people will, but at the same time being skeptical absolutely will. Folks, give that some thought. We'll see a more jacked you next time.